Hey friends, it's Corey from Hey Let's Make Stuff. In today's video, I'm going to give you an overview of the new xTool laser screen printer. Screen printing is sort of a decorating technology that I actually haven't talked about on this channel before, but it is something that I have wanted to try out for a really long time. So when xTool reached out to me to review their screen printer, it was a quick yes for me because I really wanted to be able to compare screen printing to some of the other decoration methods I have talked about on this channel, like HTV, sublimation printing, and direct-to-film printing. That being said, I am very new to screen printing. I have done some tests, but I am by no means an expert. I will be happy to try and answer your questions down in the comments, but I will also want to recommend my friend Jennifer at Pigskins and Pigtails. She is a screen printing pro. She has so many videos that are really great for beginners. So if you have troubleshooting questions or you want to learn different techniques, definitely check out her channel, and I will go ahead and link that in the description below. For those of you who have screen printed for a long time, as I'm doing this, if you see anything that you want to correct or offer me advice, I would be really happy to hear that feedback down in the comments. Again, because I am very new to this, I did do a lot of research, so I have picked up some tips and tricks, but if you have more to add, I would love to hear that as well. Let's start off by talking about what screen printing even is. So basically it is a decoration method that you're going to use a stencil to create sort of a mesh screen, and then you're going to drag ink along that screen. And where your stencil doesn't have any image, it's going to push the ink through the screen and onto your garment or whatever you're decorating, and it's going to block it wherever you don't have it cut out. Many of you might be familiar with making screen prints using a Cricut or Silhouette and vinyl. So basically you'll make that stencil out of vinyl and then you'll place it on your screen. For this system, we are actually making the stencil on our laser. And because that laser can cut incredibly intricate designs, you can really create some very cool projects using this system. A quick note that screen printing is basically just newer technology than silk screening. Some people still use the term silk screening, but we don't use silk for our screens anymore, so we just use the terms screen printing. There are still some art applications where people might be using silk, but in general we're using a nylon or other material for our screens, so it's not silk screening, it's screen printing. Screen printing does have quite a wide variety of applications. Of course, we mostly know it for making garments like t-shirts and hoodies, but you can also use a screen printer for things like art prints or wood panels, canvases, tote bags, even hats. There is quite a number of things you can make using this system. And then you might want to know how screen printing wears and washes. And honestly, it is one of my absolute favorite ways to make a garment. I think my top way would be sublimation, where the ink actually becomes sort of one with the fibers of your garment. However, screen printing is pretty close to that. If anything, it's just going to get sort of these micro cracks in it, and over time it will just look a little bit vintage, but overall it adheres to the shirt or garment really well, and you can wear screen printed garments basically forever. Yes, they will look more vintage over time, but they just get sort of soft and cozy, and it really is a great way to do t-shirt decoration. Now let's talk a little bit more about this specific laser system. So this is the multicolor set from xTool, and it works really well with my xTool S1 laser. It also works really well with the xTool D1 laser, which is sort of an open laser. It doesn't have that enclosure. You can also use this multicolor set with your xTool P2, the big, larger CO2 laser. However, it doesn't have a frame fixing piece, which we are going to talk about here in a little bit. That being said, I will link to a tutorial down in the description for creating your own out of draft board or another material, so you can use the multicolor set with that laser as well. If you have the xTool M1 or F1, they recommend the basic set, which is basically for making one color screen prints. This set can make multicolor screen prints, but because there is no frame fixing piece that will work with the M1 or the F1, they suggest just using it for a basic single color design. So for this video, I am going to be talking about the multicolor set. We are only going to be making a single color print for this video. I am making a second video where we will be making a two-color print, but I wanted to keep it simple for this video. So you can use this sort of technique with any of the lasers that I talked about, but specifically I am going to be using my S1 laser because I think it integrates really nicely with that machine. And there are tutorials for using this set or the basic set with some of the other lasers online as well. When I got the xTool laser screen printer, I was really impressed with the packaging. It was packed so nicely. I mean, this is a lot of stuff, and there's actually more that I don't have in front of me that came inside the box. And I was just really impressed with how they used the space and how well it was packed. This is sort of a oddly shaped system. There are a lot of pieces, there are a lot of things happening here, and I think it could get a little bit difficult to store. So my advice would be to keep the box that it came in. You don't need to keep all of the styrofoam pieces that kept everything perfectly packed in there, but it is a decent sized box and it's a good quality box, so I do feel like that is actually one of the best ways that you can store all of the pieces of the screen printing system. Let's talk about what comes in this multicolor screen print box. If you get that basic box, it's going to have a lot of these things as well, just fewer of them, and how you use them is basically exactly the same, but I wanted to show you what came in that larger multicolored box. To start, we have the screen printing base. So this is basically where we are going to do our screen printing. And then there is a wood base that goes on top of it, and it has magnets to attach it to the base. Once you have attached it with those magnets, it doesn't really move around. So if you find it sort of shifting around, you don't have all of the magnets attached, you just want to make sure that you get all 3 of the magnets on the back attached so that this doesn't move around. Next up, there is a sticky mat. This looks like something you might put in the bottom of your xTool M1 if you have that blade cutter, or in your Cricut or your Silhouette. And this basically goes on the wood base here. This keeps the garment or whatever else you're pressing from sort of lifting up when you pull up your screen print. This also helps, especially if you're doing a multicolored print, because you do not want that garment to shift at all if you're going to be adding a second screen. So use the sticky pad to keep everything in place when you're screen printing. And then in the overhead view, we're going to talk about a few other things. So this is basically the screen printing frame. You can see that I have it flipped. So this is sort of the back side where it has these rails. If I flip it over, it has sort of a solid side, but we are mostly going to be working from the back. It also has these little clips that go around. There are 6 clips that you can open and close. This basically tightens the screen. We'll do that here in a minute. And then on this end over here, this is the end that will go in the screen printing base that I just talked about. With the multicolor kit, you get 4 of these frames. And then we have our screen. So this is a 100 mesh screen. If you are a screen printer and you're curious, it does have these sort of flaps. We'll be using these flaps to put the screen into the frame. On the back, there is a piece of cardboard, and this is going to help us center this into our frame. And then we have 4 fixing pins. These are what we're going to use to actually secure the screen to our frame. Also inside the box, you're actually going to get 11 colors of ink, which I thought was pretty generous. Now these say red, blue, yellow, and black, but after opening them up, they really are CMYK. So we have that sort of cyan blue. We have magenta, not red, so it really is a brighter pink color as opposed to a really true red, yellow, and black. There's also a glitter gold, there is a glitter silver, and there is a glow in the dark. Then you're also going to get your squeegee, which has a magnet on the back, which honestly, one of my favorite things about this whole system is this silly little magnet. This magnet attaches to that big frame piece that I showed you in the overhead and allows you to basically attach this to the frame piece so you don't have to figure out where to set it on your work table. If you have ink all over it, it will just attach to that frame piece and keep it out of your way. You're also going to get a little palette knife. This is for applying that ink to the screen. And then a few more things in the overhead here. We have a tote bag, which you can practice on. I actually have not tried practicing on this tote bag. You're going to get some cardstock, and I think this cardstock is for putting in between layers of smaller garments. However, I'm not positive. There was no instructions on what this cardstock is for. I actually used one to make an art print, and it turned out really well, so maybe you could use it for art prints if you'd like. Then we also have a sheet of little stickers here, so I'm just gonna peel one up to show you. Oops, I'm gonna peel up a bunch. So basically, these are little stickers, and as you can see here, maybe in this tiny little shot here, you can place these on that wood board so that if you are doing something like batch producing art prints, you can put these exactly on the board so you know exactly where to put your paper so you can do your art print. You are also going to get your screen printer user manual. This is in a ton of different languages, so if you speak something other than English, you can probably find it in this list. Honestly, this is a bigger manual than I even got with my S1. I mean, it's quite thick, so there is a lot of information here that you'll want to read through before you do your screen printing. And then finally, there is this single instruction sheet for the frame fixing piece, which we will talk about, but this is super helpful because it has these QR codes. If you have the S1, click the top one. If you have the D1, click the bottom one, and it will teach you how to install that frame piece. I'm going to go ahead and go into that in this video, but I found this really helpful when I was trying to figure out what I was doing. So make sure you don't lose this, and you can click on that little QR code so that you can go and get the right information. So that was everything that comes in the box. And basically it is everything you need to get started, but I do have some other supplies here that that as I've been testing, I have found that I also like having on hand. I'm going to go into pretty much using all of these in this video. However, you may not want to go out and buy them all at once. You may want to see what you need that will work for you. But this is just stuff that I had either on hand or that I purchased that really helped make my screen prints better. The first thing I bought was some Speedball opaque ink for fabric. So I wanted to be able to put some of these designs on darker garments, and so I knew I needed an opaque fabric ink for that, so I went ahead and bought this because there was no white ink that came with the system. I wanted to be able to make some like lighter pinks and lighter teals and, you know, sort of my Hey Let's Make Stuff colors. So this was kind of my first ink purchase outside of what came with the machine. And then I also had on hand some of these little jars for mixing my own custom colors. And then I also broke out my 2-inch painter's tape. We're going to use this when we are putting our screens together. This basically helps keep your screen a little bit cleaner instead of getting ink in between the frame of the screen and the screen itself. One other thing I think is almost essential for this is a flathead screwdriver. I've talked about this in other videos. I have some chronic pain in my hands and I just don't have a lot of strength in my hands. And using the fixing pins to put in the screens can be a little difficult, but getting them out is very difficult. And I found that this flathead screwdriver made it a lot easier. Then I've got 3 cans of stuff here. The first is some compressed air. This is for cleaning your screen after you have cut it to make sure that there is nothing on your screen that's going to get in the way of your perfect print. I also have some screen printer's tack. So this would be used in place of that blue sticky mat that I showed you earlier in the video. The blue sticky mat, I already feel after several uses is becoming not that sticky because it's getting all the fibers from the shirts that I've been using. So I think I'm going to use the screen printer tack instead. So basically you're going to spray this on the surface, you can spray this on the mat, and that makes sure that whatever you're printing sticks to the mat and doesn't come up when you pull up your screen print. You may also want a bottle of screen cleaner. Basically, this helps you clean up your screens after you've done your screen printing. I did it with water, but I could tell that this would actually probably make more sense. This came after I did all of my tests, so I'm going to use this when I clean up the screens that I make today. And then you're going to want some paper towels. Thankfully, this ink does clean up pretty easily, but you know, it's ink, it can get messy, so you're going to want something around that you can like wipe up your hands or whatever else so you don't get ink everywhere. Now I'm quickly going to talk about curing your prints. This is the step that happens at the end. However, these inks say that they can be cured by just sitting out for 48 hours. Most other screen printing ink needs to be cured in a heat press, and that includes this Speedball ink here. So if you are using a different type of ink, you may want to also have a heat press and a Teflon sheet. I'll talk more about this curing process later in this video, but I wanted to mention the heat press and the Teflon sheet just in case you want to add it to your supply list. All right, now we can get to putting our screen together and engraving it using the laser. For this project, I have a free file for you. It's very cute. It says plays well with otters. It's a little otter, very cute. You can grab that in my craft library. Go to heyletsmakestuff.com/library. From there, you can request the password if you don't already have it, enter it, and you can get into the craft library. From there are 2 ways to find the file. This file is L13, so laser 13, L13. The first way to find it is to click the laser button and you'll be taken down to the laser section where you can find L13. The second way to find it is to use the find function on your computer. So Control F if you are on a PC, Command F if you are on a Mac, and search for L13 and you'll be taken right to the file. There you'll see 3 links. The first link is the download that and you'll get a zip with the file inside of it. The second link is for the blog post for this video, and the third link is for this video. But before we get into xTool Creative Space to upload that file, let's go ahead and set up our screen. To set up our frame, we're going to need the frame itself. Note that I have those rails facing up so I can access them. You're going to need 4 frame pins, so you've got 2 long ones and 2 short ones. And then you're going to need the screen itself. Now before we put the screen into the frame, we want to make sure all of our levers on the outside are open. So when they are facing sort of the inside of the frame, that's closed, so we want to make sure they are open. So I've got the ones over here open, they're sort of facing out, and then the ones on this end here also facing out. Now we can add our screen, so you'll remember that there is a piece of cardboard on the back. This is basically the size of the frame, so you want to sort of seat it inside the frame. It'll be able to move around a little bit, but not a lot. And now we can add our frame fixing pieces. Of the entire process, this is the most difficult for me with that chronic pain in my hands. You just need some grip strength, so I wouldn't necessarily recommend this entire system if you have really weak hands. I have found some workarounds, which I'm going to show you, and I've gotten better at it as I've done more of them, but honestly, there have been some times where I'm like, my hands hurt. So it's just something to keep in mind with this particular system. I think after using it for a while, it gets easier, but the first few that I made were really difficult. So I'm going to start with this bottom edge here. And one thing I want to note is that when you're looking at the actual frame itself, there is the side that connects to the base plate for the screen printer. And it has this sort of metal bar right here. And this can get in the way of your screen print. So if I actually scoot this over, this just gets a lot harder to press into the rail. So I like to have this scooted as far as I can away from the side that has this bracket. And then I'm going to grab my frame pin here. And basically what we're going to do is we're going to press this into the frame of our machine. It's sort of at a 45-degree angle. I sort of have found if I wiggle it back and forth, and then I can go in and press it down. Now that one went in really easily. Some of them are much more difficult, so I'm going to flip this around. And we're going to do the other long side. So again, we're going to get it in here. We're going to sort of wiggle it in. We want to make sure that this is not overlapping that piece of metal here if possible. It's a little bit, but not so bad. And then we're going to work on pressing this in and closing it. If you are having a hard time getting it pressed down, double check that the entire width is seated properly. A lot of times if I couldn't press it down all the way, there was one side of it that was up a little bit. So you want to make sure it gets all the way in there. If you're still having a hard time pressing it down, I have found that if I actually flip it over and press down on the frame, it goes that last little bit. Now we can do both of the shorter ends. So again, I'm grabbing my little frame fixing piece here. I'm going to kind of wiggle it into place and press it down. And we'll do the final side as well. Get it sort of wiggled in there, make sure everything is in there properly, and press down, just like that. So right now our screen is still pretty loose in here, and we definitely don't want that. So this is when we close these little levers. This is going to stretch the screen as it closes, so you can see this as it closes. It stretches the screen and makes it much more tight in the frame. So I'm going to do both sides here first. Again, this is another place where it requires some grip strength. If you cannot get it, which has been a possibility for me, this is just too strong, I will actually lift this up and let my table do the work. It works out really well that way. We'll do the two on the end. Again, very difficult, so I'm going to let my table do the work. And the final one here. That one was okay. Now before we can put it into our laser, we need to flip it over and we need to remove the cardboard. Now I've seen other people do this and it comes out really easily. I have done this several times and it's not been easy, so let's see how this one goes. Now on every other piece that I've done this on, I've actually had cardboard stick to this, and I've had to actually peel up the adhesive. I do see that there is some adhesive on here, so if I was printing something that was as large as this frame, I may have a problem with this adhesive. I haven't done that yet. Everything has been in sort of the middle, but it's just something to be aware of. I am a little nervous about some of this little bit of adhesive that's left from that cardboard. You could always try using something like alcohol or goof off to get this sort of adhesive off if you find that it's a problem. Now you can really hear that drum sound. That's exactly how you want it to sound, and we're gonna go ahead and put this inside the laser machine. So you can see here that we are going to remove the two screws on the right side of the machine, and we're going to insert this frame fixing piece. Now again, this piece only comes with this particular piece for the S1. There is a different one for the D1, and then there is one you can make yourself for the P2. If you have that xTool M1 or the xTool F1, you don't have that frame fixing piece, which is why you'll want to use the basic kit. Now we're going to insert this into the bed of the laser. Now if you look in the overhead view, it has these two slots here, and these are the two pieces that are going to go into that frame fixing piece that we added to the laser. Place your screen into the machine with the screen facing up and slide it onto the posts. It shouldn't move around once you have it on those posts, and it basically means that anytime you put a screen there, it's going to engrave your screen in the exact correct area. Now it's time to pop into xTool Creative Space to set up our file. Here I am in xTool Creative Space. The first thing we want to do is set our type of processing to screen print. Now automatically it puts this green rectangle on my screen, and this is where the actual engravable area is. So we want to make sure we do that so we know exactly where we're going to put our image. Then I'm going to upload my image by going to import image and navigating to my file. I'm going to upload an SVG in this case. Right now it's quite large, so I'm going to say yes, scale it to fit the canvas. Again, I get a warning at the top that says that I need to install that frame fixing piece on the right side and that I need to reflect my pattern horizontally. So we're basically reversing it. So I have everything selected and I'm going to reflect horizontally. I'm going to close this little warning. Then I'm going to make this much smaller than it is right now. Let's see, let's go ahead and make it 8 inches tall. When you're looking at this, my frame fixing piece is over here on the right. So this is where the hinge of my machine is. So I actually want to put the file on the other side over here on the left. So I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees, just like that. I'm going to move it up. So again, the hinge is over on this side, so the top of my shirt will be on this side. So we want to have our design basically 2 inches from the top of the shirt. To do that, I'm going to create a shape. I'm going to go to shape, I'm going to expand it a bit and get myself a little rectangle here, and I'm going to change the width of this shape to 2 inches. This basically is sort of a marker on where I want to put my file. So I'm going to center it here in my rectangle, and then I can place my design. So I could center it, but because this is sort of an oddly shaped design, I do want to move it over just a little bit. Yes, it's not quite centered in my canvas here, but because the back of his little behind here isn't quite as important as sort of his face, I want his face to be just a little bit more centered. Now, because this SVG has 2 layers, it's going to try and process this as 2 layers. So I'm going to select both, and then I'm going to go up to combine and subtract. This basically cuts out the letters from my otter shape, and I have 1 single piece that we're dealing with here. I'm also going to delete this little 2-inch rectangle that we made, because we don't want to process that. And we are ready to process this file. So to start, you saw that I moved the laser head sort of to the center of my screen, and that is so we can measure the distance. So up here under distance, there is this little targeting icon. I'm going to click it, and it's going to auto measure the height of my screen. And then finally, we need to set our materials. So go over here, it's not a user-defined material. We want to scroll down until we find that coded screen 100 mesh. We'll also want to click on our file and make sure it is set to engrave. If I click off, you can see again, I have it set to that coded screen so it knows exactly what it needs to engrave. Then I'm going to hit process. We'll see our file here, make sure it looks good, make sure it's reversed, because if it's not, you're gonna have a backwards image. Click start, and it's ready to cut. Now I've already cut this one, and it took 30 minutes. So it is not the fastest process, and this is a pretty fast laser. So if you're doing this on something like a M1, it will be even slower, but you can let it run while you're doing other things. Click the button on the front of the machine to start your laser. Once it's done, you can see here that we have our screen print. So if I put my hand under there, you can see my hand through. So now when we go to put the ink on our project, it will go through where you can see through, and the blue part will block the ink. So one thing you may want to do when your screen print is done is you may want to hit it with a little bit of compressed air. I mentioned this in the supply list, and this will just remove any extra little bits of screen that didn't get pulled out of the laser. So you can go ahead and clean it off. This will help ensure that you get a really clean transfer. Now we can add our screen to the base. So like we did with the frame, there are these little locking levers here. You want to make sure they are open to the outside. And then we're going to slide this into this little bracket here. Now the same place where we had those posts in the machine is the same place that we slide it into the bracket. So slide it in here just like that. And then we will close the 2 little levers here. Now, depending on what you're screen printing, your height will vary. So a t-shirt is much thinner than a hoodie, which is much thinner than something like a wood box, which you could also screen print on. So over here on the side, there is basically a lever so you can adjust the height. Now I'm doing a t-shirt, so I basically want it kind of all the way down, and then I can tighten it. And now when I press this down, it will be perfectly on my t-shirt. If you're doing something higher, you want to adjust it so that it's higher. For this project, I'm using a Bella Canvas Kids plain cotton tee. If you've been around here any length of time, you'll know that I love Bella Canvas garments. Bella Canvas has a really great makers program. So if you have a shop or you just make a lot of garments, you can sign up for their makers account, and it basically allows you to buy their garments at wholesale pricing without a reseller license. It's really wonderful. It gets you great pricing. I will go ahead and link that program down in the description. It's free to sign up. If you're doing something like a t-shirt, you can actually thread it onto the base, which means that you are only going to be working on the front piece of fabric. You're not going to worry about getting ink on the back. So this works really well. You can thread it underneath, and we'll go ahead and put it on here. Again, we have that sticky mat on there, so it can be a little bit hard to thread, but you basically want the collar where we decided at the top of our image here. So we want the collar there, and we're going to get everything else flat. You can see in the overhead shot here that it's very smooth. You don't want any wrinkles or bubbles because that can get in the way of your screen print. Then let's go ahead and test this to make sure it's still a good height. It feels like a really good height. It sits really nicely on top here. If you have a gap, you definitely want to make sure that you lower this down so that you're screen printing directly on top of whatever you're screen printing. At the end of the machine, there are 3 knobs, and these will actually give you these sort of micro adjustments. So if you need to move everything over just a little bit to the left or the right, you can use these. It also moves it back and forth. I found that these are really, really slight adjustments. It doesn't seem like they're moving a ton, but if you really want to get some good placement, you may want to mess with these knobs a little bit. I'm going to add basically a layer of tape around all of the edges here. This just keeps the ink from getting in between the frame and the screen. It just makes it a lot easier to clean it up. I have done several of these, and I have found that I just wash off the screen and I leave the tape on there, and then I can reuse the screen. You don't have to pull the tape up every single time unless it's got a ton of paint on it. But I think this just works really well for cleanup. Okay, this was a lot of setup, but we are finally ready to screen print. So we need a few things. We need that squeegee. Like I said, if you look in the overhead view here, it now has that magnet, which is really awesome. We're gonna need our little spatula. We're gonna need our ink. I'm using this red, which again is magenta, and I have a paper towel. We're gonna start by mixing the ink really well. You definitely don't want to just go at it without mixing it, so I'm gonna mix it super well. Now this is quite a tall design, so I am gonna need more ink than I first thought I would, just because I have to drag ink basically from his tail all the way to his head. So we're gonna go ahead and just put a line of ink kind of at the bottom here. I do not have the best system for putting ink on here yet, but we're working on it. Make sure we get all the way across. Too much ink can cause sort of blurry edges, but in my tests, I found I wasn't getting enough ink on his head, so we're gonna just try and make sure we have enough. I watched a lot of videos about how to drag this squeegee across the image here, and everybody does it differently. So I have found that I'm gonna do sort of 2 strokes here. It might need a little bit more to make sure I'm getting his head, but the first stroke I'm not gonna press down very hard, and I'm basically gonna flood the screen. It's not gonna be hard enough that I'm pressing that it's actually going through the screen, but it will get ink all the way across the screen. Then I'm gonna do a second, much more sturdy stroke. I'm not gonna press super hard, but I'm gonna press much harder, and that's actually gonna press the ink onto our garment. All right, so this first stroke, I'm holding this at a 45-degree angle, and we're just gonna sort of flood the screen. Just like that. Now you can see here that I missed the top of his head, and that's kind of what I was talking about before. This time I'm gonna press a little bit harder, make sure we're marking his whole head here. Now this is still gonna be a problem, so I'm going to scrape off a little bit of the ink I used here, just get it where his head is, and hopefully we can make sure his head gets colored as well. I'm gonna kind of flood it, and then I'm gonna press down as I get up to his head, just like that. I'll drag it across one more time, and I think that looks pretty good. Now again, I've got my magnet here, so nice, and I'm going to carefully lift this up. There we go, we have our shirt. Now again, I'm still pretty new to this. You can see here that this is probably much lower than I wanted it to be. I should have looked at where I was locating this shirt a little bit better. You know, live and learn, but other than that, I'm really happy with the screen print itself. Now before I take the shirt off, I'm going to sort of clean up this extra ink and put it right back into the container, just like this. That palette knife is really helpful. Just like that. I'm also, without pressing this all the way down, I'm gonna pull the rest of the ink off of the screen here so that I don't waste that ink. This is much better if I'm left-handed, so let's see if I can be left-handed for a second. There we go. Now I can take this shirt off and I can put another shirt on, do another screen print, and I can kind of get them batched. This is really great. However, I do find getting this off while this ink is still wet with the sticky mat to be a little bit difficult. I think getting it off with the tack that I showed you earlier would be a little bit easier. The other thing you could do is grab a heat gun and actually sort of dry this a little bit before pulling it off. But I am going to show you the process of pulling this off of this mat to just kind of show you that it can be a little bit difficult. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take the screen off. So I'm going to undo these levers and I'm going to pull this screen off and set it aside. Now let's try and get the t-shirt off. So like I said, it can be a little bit difficult because I don't want to mess up my design here and it's still wet. So I'm just going to carefully pull everything up just like this. You can kind of pull from the other side as well, just like this, but you don't want to basically fold over the ink and get the ink anywhere else on your shirt. So I'm just going to pull it off just like this. So here I have my Plays Well with Otter shirt. You can see that I still need some work on actually locating this properly. This is kind of a weirdly shaped design. I think if I had something that was a little bit more square and normal, it would be a little bit easier. But overall, I'm really happy with how this turned out. Now let's talk again about curing. So other inks, not xTool inks, need a heat press to cure. So basically you're gonna let it dry for about 24 hours, and then you're gonna set your heat press to something like 350 degrees and use a Teflon sheet and press it for 30 seconds. That basically sets the ink so that it can be washed. The xTool ink says that it can just dry for 48 hours without any curing. You may want to still cure it, I'm not sure. But overall, it's kind of nice that you don't need the heat press for this type of screen printing system. For this one I made actually more than 48 hours ago. It's definitely dry to the touch. I haven't done a wash test yet, but go ahead and follow my Instagram channel because I think I'm going to go ahead and make a reel about how these actually wash with this particular xTool ink. All right, one last thing is I want to talk about reusing these screens. So you get these 4 screen frames, but if you want to make more things but still use the screens, you want to make sure that you can actually do that. So I wanted to just go through a couple tips and tricks. To remove the screens, you want to pull up on all of these little levers again, just like this. And then you can pull out your fixing pins. If you are struggling to get the fixing pin out, which I did sometimes, that is where that flathead screwdriver can come in. You can kind of basically lever it up. So hopefully you won't have too much trouble, but if you do, that flathead screwdriver really can come in handy. So before I pull out these other 2 fixing pins, I want to talk about one more tip that xTool has on their website that I thought was pretty brilliant. If you want to make sure to get this in the exact same place when you're putting it in later, you can actually flip this over, pull up the tape, and then you may want to put like little triangular wood pieces or something like that in each corner. And you're going to super glue them to the corners. And this means that when you go to put the screen back into the frame, it's actually going to be in the frame in the exact same place every time. I think it generally will get in the same place, but if you want it in the exact same place because you're doing a run of shirts that you need it in the exact same place every time, you may want to try gluing a couple of triangles into all 4 corners so that when you put that screen in, it sort of acts like the cardboard earlier in this video. I just thought that was a really great tip. All right, we're gonna finish pulling these out. You can see here, that one was a little tough. And then we'll go to this one, not so bad. And then you can pull the screen out. Oh, I still have the tape on the back. Let's take that tape off. Then we can pull this whole thing out here. And you can store it and use it again. Again, definitely clean it. I didn't clean it for this one just because I didn't have the time, but once you've cleaned your screen, you can pull it out and store it and use it again. To clean the screen, you'll want to use cool water. You may see some staining. Staining isn't so bad, but you definitely don't want anything that's going to be clogging your screen. So if you find that your screen isn't transferring very well anymore, you can use that screen cleaner that I talked about earlier in the video, and that will really help bring up the ink so that you'll get a really clean transfer. All right, I hope you found this video on using the xTool laser screen printer helpful. Again, I'm just getting started with this, very new to screen printing. I can't wait to do some multicolor prints, which I'm going to do a video about. If you have any questions, of course, leave those in the comments. If you found this video helpful, I would appreciate a like. Follow my channel for more laser, Cricut, and sublimation content. I'll see you next time.